Welcome to episode 219 of the Disorganized Wizards Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined as always by my co-host Cam.
Hello.
And returning guest, legacy aficionado, I believe we called him last time he was on the show. We've got Dylan back to talk a little bit about one of the biggest band announcements we've ever had. How you doing, Dylan?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite back to the show, guys.
Glad to have you here for sure. A lot to talk about today. Bunch of announcements this past week, one of which I already hinted at. The largest banned and restricted announcement we have ever seen in Magic's history. Cards banned across multiple formats. It was absolutely insane. But before we get into it.
It started in such an unassuming way. In that secret layer, there was one little sentence that said, okay, guys, we're going to ban Uro, and we're also working on a larger announcement. What a sly use of the word larger.
Yeah, it was certainly larger for sure. Before we get into it though, got to take this opportunity to shout out our sponsor, wizardtower.com. Check them out for all your Magic single needs. Got sweet call time product up on their website. Head on over wizardtower.com. Also, if you want to see more content from us, you can check out our website, dwc.gg, for all things the Disorganized Wizards Club.
So we brought Dylan on. We brought Dylan on to chat about the announcement since he's our Eternal format guy. But have you been playing many Eternal formats lately? What have you been up to in Magic, Dylan?
I haven't been playing a ton of Eternal Magic recently. The last time I played some Legacy was actually with Alex for the Legacy Open Championship a few months ago that you guys streamed half of. Really, I've been playing a lot of Historic about the last year. Sometime around a year ago, I decided to make the run to Mythic with Mono Blue Tempo, and then just kind of like always stayed in the Mythic or Platinum range of Historic ever since, playing anything from Elves to Goblins to Mono Blue.
Until about 2 colors in your deck, or?
No, I don't like complicating my mana base. That takes a bunch of wild cards I don't have still, so I'm too busy spending those on other things.
Fair enough.
Last month, I've actually gone back to playing Standard for the first time in kind of 3 or 4 years. I've been playing a lot of the Teamer Ramp kind of Genesis Ultimatum, like tap-out deck, to kind of medium success because I've been being beaten up by Soul Type by a fair amount. But when you win with that deck, it is so much fun. It's unbelievable.
I believe
it's a good time to get back into Standard.
Yeah, like it seems like the overall power level of cards are like, generally speaking, pretty high, but like nothing seems unbelievably out of whack compared to anything else, right? Like there's nothing that seems miles better than anything else you could be doing, which has really been my Standard experience every other time in the last 3 some odd years now.
Yeah, that's about like if you threw a dart at a dartboard of Standard formats recently, you wouldn't be having fun playing darts or Standard. But this one's pretty good.
Yeah, definitely one of the better ones we've had in a little while. But since you mentioned about playing a lot of Historic, we can jump right into this banned and restricted announcement because it also kicks off with Historic. Omnath Locust of Recreation moved from the suspended list to the banned list. No surprise there. And then Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, getting the axe. No suspension. They're not messing around like they normally do. This one is just straight to the ban list.
Yeah, I don't think this is a terribly large surprise to anybody that's been playing Modern. I don't necessarily, or sorry, not Modern, Historic. I don't think it's necessarily the most offensive card or the most offensive thing you could be doing in Historic. I'm looking at Boggles when I say that. But when you lose to Uro, like it's such a loss and it's such a beating where there's times where you're like, you feel like you weren't even in the game. You're like, I kept my 7. Okay, this hand looks okay. Oh, I got Thought Seized. Oh, my opponent played a Growth Spiral. My opponent played an Uro. Nisa, and you're just so unbelievably far behind at that point in time. So
yeah,
that's sort of why I stopped playing Historic was, yeah, like losing to Boggles is an experience in and of itself, but it wasn't as pervasive as the game you just described. There were so many Growth Spiral Uro Nessa decks that were strong, and because they were strong, they were so dominant. And a lot of their games played the same because of this built-in consistency. And unless you were playing something like Boggles that could, get out of the gate quick, or goblins or something. Didn't really feel like other mid-ranger control decks had a chance. So my experience just became so much playing against Uro and Nissa that I just stopped wanting to do it. So I'm quite glad to see Uro gone. And hopefully, like Crow Spiral and Nissa are still around. Maybe that deck still exists, but hopefully it's less prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, losing Uro is a really huge hit for those decks. But, I mean, Uro has just dominated Historic ever since that card came out. So not really surprised to see it go. People have been complaining about this card nonstop.
Yeah, you'll have games against Sultai decks where like they grow Spiral and they play an Uro for a land and they play a Nissa and you clean up all of it. The problem is that, as people have probably done or had happen to them many times, then they escape an Uro and they get an extra draw when you're both top decking, and from there they win. So like now your ability to deal with the first Nissa and maybe Thoughtseize out their other threat could actually lead to like a scenario in which you win the game much more often, rather than them being just miles better at top decking than you.
Yeah, it's just like impossible to account for every axis they were attacking on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like the interaction with graveyards in Historic, like there's certainly some very good cards, but really nobody's using their graveyard other than for Uro. So it's like, yes, Scavenging Ooze has some like applications if you stick that in your sideboard or your main deck, but really there's like any card that interacts with the graveyards really for Uro and no other cards.
Yeah, it's funny, like Grafdigger's Cage was a main deck card in this format for a very long time, and it wasn't really because like it was mostly not because of the actual graveyard. It was for cards like Collected Company, Bolus's Citadel, Muxus. But you're right. Like outside of the Uro decks, really the only other deck that actively uses its graveyard, I guess you could say, is the Sacrifice decks between like Cauldron Familiar and Scrap Heap Scrounger, but that's kind of it, right?
Yeah, and those decks operate on enough of a different axis that like I really don't think you want to be bringing in graveyard interaction for them. Like having it's certainly not a bad thing, but like your Scavenging Ooze isn't ever going to tag a cat unless your opponent slips up somewhere. And then overall, Grafdigger's Cage isn't great against Sacrifice unless your opponent's like the Jund variant that's added Collected Company.
Yeah. But yeah, that is the Historic bans, the smallest part of this ban and restricted announcement to kick things off.
Which is crazy, because in the past, 2 cards banned in a format would be news in and of itself.
Yeah. Moving on to our next constructed format here, we have Pioneer, where Balustrade Spy, Teferi Time Raveler, Undercity Informer, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, and Wilderness Reclamation all banned. So out of all these cards, obviously Balustrade Spy and Undercity Informer make complete sense to me with how good the Oops All Spells deck was in this format. I think everyone got to see that firsthand with the most recent Magic Online Championship, where I think the guy who played the Oops All Spells deck like just didn't lose across the entire tournament with that deck until the finals. And they've shown that they don't want Pioneer to be a consistent combo format with their recent bans, cards like Inverter of Truth and Walking Ballista. So really no surprise here to see these cards go. I think everyone is pretty happy about these cards getting the axe. Of course, this is another format where Uro is taken out of. Just another card that has been absolutely dominant since it entered the format. And it's just a little too powerful compared to everything else that exists in the format. Like it was in Historic, like it was in Standard. So it's gone too. And then the interesting one here is banning Teferi Time Raveler. Which in turn led to banning Wilderness Reclamation because they were worried about Reclamation decks getting a little too powerful in Teferi's absence. I wasn't really expecting the Teferi ban. They note in their description of the bans here that they banned it because it was a card like Reclamation had previously overstayed its welcome in Standard. And removing it will have the added benefit of lowering the power level of the Niv-to-Light decks, which are among the most played and most winning archetypes.
That's why they banned Teferi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know the Niv-to-Light decks were pretty good, but I don't know, does that mean Teferi was worth getting the axe in this format? I don't know. It feels a little weird.
So I haven't paid any attention to Pioneer at all. I didn't even know what was going on, which is why, I mean, you said no one was surprised by these bans. I was surprised. I didn't even realize Oops All Spells was a thing. But as speaking with like no experience, I think the key sentence there, like Teferi overstayed its welcome. I don't think they're admitting that it's too strong or that it was problematic from a power level point of view. That card's just miserable to play against, and I don't think it ever should have been printed. So the more it gets banned, I think that's fine. Like, we've discussed this in the past with relation to Teferi, but the thing that Magic has that it did like so perfectly over so many other trading card games was instant speed interaction on both turns, and Teferi just takes that away.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to see that go in any format, even if it's weak.
Fair enough, I guess.
I'm not super up to speed on Pioneer. Like, I'd watched the championship, so I got to watch the Oops All Spells deck go off. And the thing that stuck out to me about that deck is it seemed like it had a very low fail rate. Like, inherently, the deck didn't fail itself. And then it seemed like some of the interaction with it wasn't there. Now, it's been a couple months, so I don't know how sideboards have changed. The Teferi, I think it's fine taking it out of that Niv-to-Light deck, because a lot of the time it just put the Niv-Mizzet back in your hand. It was recast, and then you just drew another 5 or 6 spells off of the Niv-Mizzet, off of the card that the Teferi already drew you. So trying to play another mid-range strategy, like with something like a Siege Rhino, which is something I've been trying to do a fair amount, you just felt embarrassingly outclassed by what this card was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it does make sense that the Niv-to-Light decks losing to Fairy does significantly lower their power level, because you would think, your best way to fight the clunky 5-color mid-range deck would be cheap interaction like counter spells, and Teferi just completely cuts off that access of attack. So, yeah, makes sense there if, Niv-to-Light had a target on its back. The one thing I was surprised about, though, is I just didn't think Niv-to-Light was a deck that had a target on its back, so I was a little caught off guard there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if it necessarily had a target on its back. I know it's been very popular, like, for more than the last year, in all honesty. Gabe Nassif, known for playing his counter spells, has been actually casting Niv-Mizzet and Pioneer for the better part of a year and then some. So when that guy puts down a counter spell for a creature, something's wrong.
Yeah, like the Niv-to-Light deck has kind of always existed, and it was pretty popular early on. Like, I remember playing against it a decent amount leading up to the Grand Prix in Phoenix, the Pioneer one that I went with Hemsley and LP2 when Hemsley played in the Pro Tour. But the Niv-to-Light deck just kind of completely fell off the radar when Inverter of Truth was running the format. And then I couldn't really tell you how popular it's been since, but I don't know, maybe more popular than I realized. But Pioneer hasn't really been a format that's been on my radar at all, because it's not really
not on Arena.
A supported format, right?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, outside of playing it casually with some friends pre-COVID, and at one point during lockdown when I did see another human being, we played some Pioneer. But yeah, really outside of those 2 times, there's been no reason to engage with the format, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I don't even know if there's an actual legitimate timeline anymore to add it to Arena. I feel like there hasn't been much conversation about that in a while. Weren't we supposed to get Pioneer Masters sometime over the past 5 months? And it just never happened. I briefly remember reading an announcement from them regarding that, and how they pushed it back for some reason. I don't really know.
Maybe they've been dealing with arena bugs. Did you hear about that wild one that they fixed in the last patch? I was talking to some people about it.
What?
If you put Stonework Pack Beast into your deck, if it was the first card you added to your deck, and then you also played Maskwood Nexus, it would just crash the game.
Okay. How did people even figure that out?
Yeah, that was my question. Like,
I have no idea.
That's so weird.
Like, being told that it's a bug, Stonework Pack Beast messes with types by giving itself a bunch of types, and Maskwood Nexus messes with types, so I could see why those might conflict in code. But yeah, who finds that? Who knows?
That's
But anyway,
so
they got
weird.
issues like this they need to fix.
Very true. All right. Okay.
When I look at the developer roadmap from January for Arena, they still have Pioneer Masters listed as under the in concept category, but no timeline or anything other than it exists. That's really all we have on it.
Yeah.
So we should definitely hang out of sets for Magic.
All right. So we saw 5 cards get banned in Pioneer. Modern, exact same thing. 5 cards banned in Modern. Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, Simian Spirit Guide, Tybalt's Trickery, Uro Titans of Nature's Wrath, axed in Modern as well. So Tybalt's Trickery breaking Omnath's record for fastest card banned out of a new standard set, I think.
Yeah, I think I heard that somewhere.
Yeah.
I was talking with somebody about this, and I believe the only other card that was banned faster than it was either Mind's Desire in Eternal formats or Memory Jar, both of which were like extreme, oh my god, we have to ban this like right now moments.
Yeah.
So
Some
Trickery
people
got
count
to live
Lutri.
for a couple weeks.
Lutri was preemptively banned in like 0 days in Commander. So if you want to count that. But
I don't. But-
yeah, I don't either.
I'm also
But,
not going to count that.
I guess we can loop in the rules change from this announcement too with the Modern cards because it's relevant for this format. They did make a rules change for how Cascade works in older formats. The new rule for Cascade is Cascade is a triggered ability that functions only while the spell with Cascade is on the stack. Cascade means when you cast a spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card whose converted mana cost is less than this spell's converted mana cost. You may cast that spell without paying its mana cost if its converted mana cost is less than this spell's converted mana cost. Then put all cards exiled this way that weren't cast on the bottom of your library. So the new part of this is that last line of text there where it checks the mana cost when it goes on the before you cast it as well.
Yeah, we had been discussing some possible fixes for the Valky Tybalt Cascade interaction on the last episode, and this was one of them that I suggested. I probably thought this was most likely, but of course that's easy to say in retrospect. But yeah, just changing Cascade so that it checks the spell again, so that if your Cascade spell costs 3, cascades into things that cost 2, and then it checks when it's on the stack that it still costs 2, whatever you're casting. So you can only hit Valky.
Yeah, so basically just fixing Cascade to work as what I imagine it was intended to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Valky doesn't need to get the axe. It gets to live on in Modern and not get played ever again. So...
well, yeah, its good target Uro is gone. So
yeah, so it's
been in a deck list since they changed the rules.
Has it?
did they?
Yeah,
Just-
I'm looking at one right now.
Did they register for a league and forget to change? Did they not know?
I said I'm looking at right now. I'm actually on the wrong page, but I swapped over tabs. So on the 17th, we have a Bring to Light Scape Shift deck that's playing 2 copies of it in the main deck.
Bring to Light can still cast Tybalt, so that's interesting.
Yes,
Nice.
so there's still room for you to get Valky'd much earlier than you're supposed to be. Sorry, Tybalt-id earlier than you're supposed to be.
Yeah,
Yeah, if much earlier is turn 5, I think I'm fine with that.
yeah. As long as it's not turn 1, 2, or 3, I think it's okay. Turn 3 in Modern is fine. I'll change my mind. Turn 3, 7-mana Planeswalker in Modern, totally
You can write that one off as
reasonable
okay.
and should be allowed always. So that's okay.
Oh, did you see the Boggletron list that was floating around?
I did, and I hated it.
I did not see this, so give me like the TLDR really quickly.
Oh,
Half
it's
the cards
exactly
are
what you
Boggle
think.
cards. The other half are Tron cards.
It is an abomination.
That's like in the past, like people have certainly merged archetypes like that to create something new, but like they're normally very similar. Like people took like Scapes Shift and Storm and kind of combined them together. I feel like Boggles and Tron are not two decks that should be meshed. Maybe that's just me.
There
No,
was
I
some
agree.
overlap. There was Eldrazi Conscription. That's,
Okay,
that's a Tron and Boggles card.
this is true. I don't know if I've ever seen that card actually like paid full cost for outside a draft before, so
Yeah, time to try something new.
I think I'll pass.
All right, so focusing back in on these cards banned in Modern, like in Pioneer, Uro just became the mainstay inclusion among all the top decks in the format, and pushed out any other non-Uro mid-range, non-Uro control decks. So they banned it to open up, space in the metagame, and maybe we can see a more variety in those archetypes again in Uro's absence. Along with Uro, Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary are pretty interesting, right? So this is now, what is it, the fourth format that Field of the Dead has been banned in? It is now legal only in Legacy and in Vintage.
That card, yeah, I mean, Adam had it pegged from the beginning. I guess the mistake they made in its design, and that most of us made while we were analyzing it at first, is like the cost sounds high, a bunch of lands with different names, but then you realize how many reasonable lands they've printed over the years. It's not actually really a cost. It ends up just being a free roll, especially in decks like, I think, Stella, you were talking about Prime Time, like decks that can fetch it out. You don't need that many copies, which means the colorless isn't a downside.
Yeah,
And so it ends up just being this army in a can that you don't have to work for, that's in your mana base for free.
Yeah, the Amulet Titan decks basically all adopted this card immediately, and it came at no cost for them. And they mentioned this in their reasoning for both Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary. Both lands creating repetitive and non-interactive gain states in the late game for a relatively low deck building cost. So to promote more back and forth gameplay and interaction over win conditions, we're choosing to remove them. That part I find hilarious. We want to up the amount of interaction in Modern. And we're going to remove these two lands. That's hilarious. But I understand the reasoning behind banning these cards. Mystic Sanctuary has one that's kind of been seeing a decent amount of discussion over the past little while as well. Just giving these, like, the blue Cryptic Command decks just this crazy end game that is really hard to deal with for a lot of decks in the format. So makes sense to get rid of that one. Next card on the list, Simian Spirit Guide, I believe is a card that has just been on everybody's radar for an incredibly long time, and is never really existing in any form of doing something that isn't degenerate in the format.
Yeah, this ban is great. Again, I don't play Modern, but I'm happy Simian Spirit Guide is gone. Ban all mana mechanics. Card should have never been printed. It was a mistake. Glad to see it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's complaining about Simian Spirit Guide going away.
Oh.
And if they are, there are also that category of people that don't want interaction in Modern. So
The people upset are those who have been playing ad nauseum for years. Those people are mad. Everyone else probably okay with it.
Mana is just so precious that hopefully they've finally learned that you shouldn't be allowed to convert anything else into mana.
Yeah.
It's the limiting factor of the game. It's how they pace everything. So don't let people turn cards into mana. Don't let people turn life into mana. Don't let people turn their end step into mana with like Wilderness Reclamation. Just don't do it. Play your one land per turn. Walk uphill both ways to school and cast your creatures.
Yeah.
I will happily walk both ways for my mana. So
Yeah, and then we mentioned it already, Tybalt's Trickery getting the axe. Of course, the rules change for Cascade. Doesn't affect Tybalt's Trickery at all, so it would still be able to exist and do its degenerate stuff, although it would be a little bit slower with Simian Spirit Guide leaving the format. They decided to remove the card because it's uniquely problematic with Cascade, which I agree with. What I'm left wondering now with Modern is, does this format have a real identity anymore? So I feel like for the Legacy has an identity, Historic had an identity, it still does. It's, Goblin's Sacrifice now. And it'll be in, I guess the next question is what replaces Uro as a pillar of the format. But Modern feels like it's lacking, an identity at the moment. Do you guys agree?
Yeah. I mean, so last time I paid attention to it, it still felt like it kind of had an identity. Like when I first started hearing about it, it had the Jund burn twin kind of pillars that gave it that fast, efficient with some combo identity. Later, when I was playing more, there was Grixis Death Shadow decks floating around. Affinity was around. Tron was around. Even things like Dredge was not uniquely modern, but it gave Modern some identity of these things you couldn't do in Standard, these interesting mechanics, these interesting ways to use resources. And then for a while, it just sort of felt like meme after meme that got banned one after another and just became kind of like a clown format. And I don't know where it is anymore.
Yeah. When I think about decks and cards that define Modern at the moment, the only thing, two cards came to my mind was Primeval Titan was the first card that jumped to my mind because I don't think that's a card that's ever going to be banned in this format. I could be wrong and I'd be a little bit surprised, but it seems pretty safe overall. But then the second card that came to my mind was actually Monastery Swiftspear. Yeah. That's not a really interesting face of your format, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually think now that Uro's gone, that those red prowess decks are going to be really good again, because they were already pretty good. Specifically the blue red prowess deck that picked up a lot of popularity. I think that deck is probably pretty clearly tier 1 now that Uro's gone.
Yeah, I feel like the blue red deck I think it was the most popular variant. I think it was, personal opinion, a little bit worse than black red overall, but I think both of these decks are right now going to be easily tier 1 and decks that you need to be watching an eye out for. This is not the time to be let's see if we can sleeve up some Teferi 5s and play a bit of a slow game. I don't think that's the thing to do right now.
Yeah, I imagine we're going to see a pretty big resurgence in those prowess decks and probably just a couple versions of Death Shadow as well.
Death Shadow's always been a cool deck. If it's around, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Death Shadow's certainly cool. And I think this could give room for humans to come back into the metagame.
That's true,
I do think that's a card that can kind of be a pillar and a bit of a defining face for Modern. So I think humans is kind of a good deck to slide into that. But humans just hasn't been played really at high numbers for the last 9 months, I'm going to say, give or take. It seemed like it just vanished overnight as cards like Uro came into the format, and then Black-Red became adapted, which wasn't a great humans matchup. So yeah, it would be interesting to see if humans comes back in full force or not.
Mm-hmm. Regardless of what happens, though, I'm probably just going to continue not playing the format because it's not supported.
Yeah.
Modern's going to live and die by paper magic, so until we get that back, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully, if for the format's sake, it gets some time here to settle itself out. Maybe these blue-red prowess decks are good for a while, but people at least have some time to adapt and try and find other decks to fit into the metagame. Because the last few sets feels like Modern just keeps getting turned on its head by new cards, and it hasn't ever had a time to settle down.
Mm-hmm. All right, so moving on to our last format here on the banned and restricted list, Legacy. And they kick off the description of Legacy here saying, while balance hasn't looked problematic in Legacy, we've heard community feedback that a few cards have come to draw too much of the focus of deck building and gameplay. Those cards being Oko, Thief of Crown, Arkham's Astrolabe, and Dreadheart Arcanist. The Arkham's Astrolabe joked about this on the pre-show. The most broken card for Modern Horizons. Banned in multiple formats. Too powerful for Legacy.
I think, and I fall a little bit in this category too, where like a lot of like Legacy players that are long-term Legacy players love the format because like it doesn't change a whole lot. Like Rug Delver has largely looked the same 52-ish cards out of 60 for the last decade, give or take now. But like Arkham's like basically rode off Wasteland as like a pillar of the format. Like it just severely changed things. And to be honest, I think that's what like the community doesn't like about it, is it just warped the format entirely. And it basically took like long, well-known strategies that people loved and they were just no longer viable. Whether or not like just, mulling to 6 and then like I drew 2 duels and I got double wastelanded so I didn't play Magic. Like I'm not going to argue if that's good or not though.
Yeah, fair enough. And the archetype Astrolabe spawned alongside Oko, Thief of Crowns, the Snow Codex. I feel like a lot of players really, really hated this archetype. Yeah,
like towards the end, I feel like decks were a bit more defined, but certainly 6 to 9 months ago, like there's a point in time where you're like, okay, what spell am I going to play like out of my opponent playing? But the deck could play any card. You could have 2 islands and 2 Arkhams untapped, and then you could get Abrupticate in the middle of combat. So you couldn't like really make like a well like thought out decision about, hey, I'm going to think about what my opponent has and make the correct play around this, because there were just too many things to play around. And really, like in terms of sideboard cards, like you could have people that had literal 0 planes in their deck, or like lands that produced white mana, but would still have multiple Swords of Plowshares post board. So
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, that's interesting. But like, I knew it had pushed out Wasteland and had made it so that these decks could consistently play their game off a mana base of basics. But I didn't even think about the just color pie breaking that it did in a format where, you have these uniquely powerful effects that are in some sense format defining that now you can include if you need to.
Nah, see, the community was mad about this card because they no longer got to play their $1,000 dual lands that they spent so much money on.
I mean,
and they were just upset about their investment, so they had to ban Astrolabe.
I mean, like, you don't show up to like a Magic tournament, walk into the tournament hall, like driving your car to show it off, because that's really part of what Legacy was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably could have got a set of foil Astrolabes. I don't know what they're mad about.
I'm actually curious what those were worth a week ago. Like, suddenly I'm like, what? How much money were those? Probably not as much as they should have been, and certainly much less now.
Astrolabe? I feel like enough Modern Horizon packs would have been open to get Hogax during its time. There's probably a million Astrolabes around, but who knows? Oko also biting the dust here. This one, I guess it's just a repetitive play pattern thing, because it's hard for me. I mean, again, I don't know Legacy, but my mental image of Legacy is like Storm killing you super fast, like Merit Lages, all these things, like Merit Lage on end step, like all these things that a 3-mana Planeswalker that makes 3/3s should have no hope of dealing with. But apparently it's just taking over.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a little bit counterintuitive when you think about Show and Tell and Doomsday and all these other very combo spell-based cards that Oko seems like such a big deal. But even like a lot of the spell-based combos would still play Lotus Petals and LEDs, where sometimes like, you play that out to play around discard spells of your opponent, and then suddenly your mana source is being turned into an elk as well. So
yeah, that's interesting. And the Oko decks, I mean, it's blue, right? So they're force decks. They have other protection against these combo things. Oko's not there for the combo matchups, but it dominates everything else.
Yeah, it kind of falls more into that category of icing on the cake, where this card was already in my deck it's already reasonable against you, and I probably have other cards to board out.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we'll ever see anything like Oko. Maybe years from now, when the community's forgotten about it, it's one of these ancient old cards that new players don't know. When WotC's hiring, part of the interview is they'll show new people in Oko, and they'll be like, do you think this card is strong? And if you say no, you don't get the job.
If that is part of their interview process, I 100% support this.
I don't know. It just makes a food.
Yeah, well, I mean, without like any actual experience with this card, right? Like, not many people pegged it as, you know, a multi-format all-star, right?
Yeah, I don't think anyone did.
No.
Like,
I thought it might show up in Modern as kind of like a fringe player, like a sideboard card, but I certainly didn't think it was going to be in like the Vintage Championship winning deck last year, as an example. Like, I would have never said that in a million years when I read the card the first time.
Yeah, like even when we did our top 10 episode for Throne of Eldraine, like I'm pretty sure we had it on number 1. If it wasn't number 1, it was definitely top 3. But we were really high on it, but even we didn't think it was going to end up getting banned in like Legacy, Modern, you know, every single format, right? So it's kind of just unassuming just how dominant this card is and how much it restricts when it comes to deck construction and gameplay, and how like the entire games just immediately start revolving around this card, which is really hard to realize when you read it for the first time. So
yeah, if your creature doesn't like generate value or something when it comes into play, like it entirely negated Termagoyf, because you're like, here's my 2-mana 6/7, and they go, you mean it's a 3/3, and I also have a bunch of 3/3s.
Yeah, it's a 3/3, and my Planeswalker now has 20 loyalty on it. So good luck ever getting it out of off the board. Yeah,
that's actually kind of funny, because I'm now saying, you're going, what's like, I've certainly used Oko's Ultimate like once in Standard or twice in Standard. I don't know if I've ever actually seen its Ultimate ability used in any other format other than Standard. So I'm really curious what like the highest loyalty like Oko's been at.
Pretty high, I'd imagine.
They probably have that stat somewhere in Moto.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So Oko gets to exist now only in Vintage and only in Commander.
He gets to hang out with Luris in Vintage, though. Best buds.
That's true, yeah. Luris unbanned in Vintage. Was originally banned, but with the companion rule change, they've decided to experiment and unban the card. I mean, we're not going to spend any time talking about that one because it's not interesting. But a card we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about is the last card banned in Legacy, which is Dreadhorde Arcanist. So I think Dreadhorde, for me anyway, out of the 3 cards here, Dreadhorde Arcanist really surprised me. But that is coming from someone who doesn't play Legacy. I just didn't really think this card was offensive in any way, but maybe Dylan can offer some more insight into it.
Yeah, this is one where I'm still on the fence on it. Because even as I'm sitting here and going, I'm not convinced it was at the power level that required a ban. I think even before these bans, if you want to list like the best 3 or 4 archetypes in Legacy, like kind of like the defining decks at the moment, is everybody's list would include Snoko or 4-color pile or whatever deck title you happen to attach to that. They would list Rug Delver or Rug Midrange, which is really the same deck at this point in time in Legacy. And then most likely they would also then list a combo deck, be it Doomsday or Ad Nauseam or one of those variants. I think that was kind of the defining 3 decks at that point in time. Maybe Death and Taxes is like number 4, like, and they're all kind of interchangeable to an extent. I think removing Oko, like, yes, you're gonna take that out of Rug Delver as well, but like you've entirely removed other archetypes, like 4-color pile will basically not exist after this ban announcement, where Rug Delver lost Oko, but that's a really ultimately easy card for them to replace. They were playing 2 copies that they could easily turn into more counter magic. stifles another creature, another threat if they want, but it would still just sit on top of the 4 dread hordes in their main deck as kind of their primary premier threat. So I'm not even convinced that it was necessarily too good, other than I think after this announcement, it was probably the most powerful archetype and the kind of go-to card at the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, I think.
Yeah, that matches up with how they've banned in the past. Ban one thing and ban its sort of immediate competition, or what its immediate successor would be.
Absolutely. Now, the reason I'm kind of on the fence for it is I wish they had given us a little bit more time to see what the format settled into, and people a little bit more time to adapt to this. Because this is one of those ones where, and we talked about this a little bit on the pre-show, in their actual ban announcement, they talked about how they didn't necessarily like how much of the early game revolved around Dreadhorde. Like, their exact terminology is that Dreadhorde makes gameplay revolve around it too early in the game, and too many games come down to whether an opponent can immediately remove it. I think if they had left Dreadhorde and given us a little bit of time for decks to tune and to adjust to this, I think you most likely would have seen an increase in removal and interaction for Dreadhorde. And I'm not convinced that it was necessarily going to take over the format a month from now once people had adapted, but I think it would have easily been problematic for the next month, and it could have ran forward and continued to be an issue after that as well. But I think they should have given us a little bit more time to play with this one personally.
Yeah, I don't really buy that argument from them either, because I feel like there's just like hundreds of cheap threats in Legacy that you could say the exact same thing about, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like this could easily turn into Young Pyromancer. And I mean, even if you add Young Pyromancer, maybe people go back to Grixis Delver instead of Rug as kind of the premier blue tempo dazed based deck. But at the end of the day, you're really not changing things substantially at that point in time, right? Like, again, when you think about pillars and archetypes, it's still a wasteland, 1 mana threat, daze based deck. And really, a lot of those threats are kind of interchangeable at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, like Young Pyromancer, it can definitely run away with the game, but what's it doing? It's making some 1/1s, which it's good. It's a powerful threat, but I guess because there's things like, I mean, even Thoughtseize with Dreadhorde Arcanist is quite strong, but even things like Brainstorm is so incredibly powerful that your Arcanists being extra Brainstorms, like Brainstorm's never going to get banned in Legacy, but it's kind of one that if it wasn't such an integral part of the format's identity, it could probably be considered for bans. So anything that lets you cast more Brainstorms is suspect.
Yeah, it's certainly the most snowbally of the threat, and I feel like that's largely what they mean by so much of the early game requires interaction for it. It's not even necessarily that, hey, the gameplay revolves around it. It's that if the game, it's the same thing. But if you don't have removal for this, it's going to snowball much, much faster than Young Pyromancer will snowball.
Mm-hmm. Again, I don't have much experience with Legacy, especially recently, but if my opponent plays their Arcanist and then they brainstorm and then they brainstorm again with the Arcanist, I'm just going to assume that their hand is perfect. And if I haven't done something similar, I'm just playing against the nut draw now.
For sure, yeah. It's at that point in time, it's well, if they didn't have a Daze or a Force of Will, they now do. If they didn't have a second threat for backup, now they have a second threat. If they didn't have a Wasteland or something, they now have a Wasteland or a land drop for the turn. It certainly creates a consistency and smooths out their draw to a level that is largely going to be unbeatable. But I also, as much as I just say that out loud, I'm this is also the format where people put Griselbrand into play on turn 1 sometimes. If you draw 14 cards with Griselbrand, your hand is also still perfect when you're said and done.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. 14 cards is a bit better than 2 Brainstorms.
As much as I say that, I'm I've definitely drawn 14 with Griselbrand and Reanimator and then still lost the game to a fair deck. So, I mean, yes, but not quite. So...
Fair enough. An interesting one to go for sure. Not a card I would have assumed with my zero experience of the format. Their reasoning sounds like it makes somewhat of sense from an outsider, but perhaps not if you do a bit more about the format.
Yeah. Again, I just wish they had given us a little bit of time because, you have to have removal for it. it's a 2-mana 1/3 you play at sorcery speed that then has to attack to do anything. I hope you can find a way of playing interaction with that. Like, yes, there's still force, will, and days in that situation, but like you should be able to interact with it. I think this is one of those things where the format could have adjusted to this, but I kind of understand Nessa sometimes look at something going, hey, there's a pretty high probability that this is just a problem, so let's just move on and get it over with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's not like they were scared of banning too many things in this announcement.
Yeah, and notably too, at the last paragraph here of the Legacy description is that they discussed banning Uro as well in Legacy, but felt its power was more in line with the overall power level of the format. Will this come back to bite them? Only time will tell.
Yeah, I haven't seen it show up in any 5.0 deck lists or anything yet. I mean, honestly, it's been a very short window. I certainly think Uro will still see play, but I think it's more likely to be a 1 of or a 2 of in a soul type based like control and mid range deck, rather than like a 4 of in your engine deck.
Yeah, I think I agree with you.
Of note, I would like to point out that I have lost more than one time to Obnath in Legacy, and I'm not saying that we need to ban it in that format, but I'm personally not opposed.
Were they casting it with astrolabes, though? Maybe it's not so easy anymore.
I'll be honest, I don't think so, but I don't recall. I think I posted a screenshot in our group chat when it happened to us, and he did have a Field of the Dead in play in Legacy when it happened, and I was just like very unhappy at the time. So
just one of those abomination decks, all the cards that have been banned ever.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, if it works, it works. Again, my Termagoyf didn't look particularly impressive for some reason, but that's my own fault, I suppose.
Yeah, this ban announcement, to me at least, kind of feels like the end of an era. Like the last movie in a trilogy where the big bad guy is finally defeated, everyone goes back home, things sort of settle out. Like they had this new design philosophy, they were printing all these cards that they didn't realize how much they did. Then there was this period where they were taking over formats. We finally realized that cards that either did everything, like Uro and Oko, or that had like no inclusion cost, things like Field of the Dead, little to no inclusion cost, Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, and then there was like a mana mechanic side quest going on at the same time. Like all of these sort of bad designs happen simultaneously, and it feels like they've finally wrecked enough formats, and they've finally trickled through standard into eternal formats. They finally got banned everywhere. That hopefully we've all learned our lesson and can live happily ever after. Put this era of Magic behind us. This ban announcement seals it up, and we can just move on with reasonable designs.
I guess the most important question we have to ask ourselves now is what the hell are Magic players going to complain about now that Uro is banned in every single format? Like, what's left to do now?
Nothing. The evil's been defeated. Magic players won't complain anymore.
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that even after you snap your fingers and you put Thanos away, there's another greater evil looming somewhere in the background. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's Boggles, but again, that might just be me.
Let us have our happily ever after. Okay? The story's been wrapped up.
That's not how things work, Cam.
They've killed the mana mechanics. They killed the do everythings.
Now we just wait for the next one.
Just let me play lands and cast spells that are very good at doing things within their color pie.
Yeah. Just let us happily ride off into the sunset as like the end drops down over the movie screen and everybody claps. It's like 1995, give or take.
Yeah, exactly. This long ban announcement was the credits. That's why it's so long. The credits were rolling.
That's why nobody's talking about the Lurrus unban in Vintage. It was the very last thing in the credits, so nobody was actually there to see it.
Like, oh yeah, true. Like, okay, here's why I'm hopeful. We also got a few spoilers over the week. There was, I think, a stream announcing some initial info on the next set, which is Strixhaven, School of Mages, I think it's called. And they showed us that there will be a cycle of 5 enemy color commands. And at first, when I was reading these commands, I thought, despite them being good quality, despite them being announced on the official stream, They must be fake. And I thought they were fake because the blue-green one is not that good.
Crazy.
That's the other thing that happened with this ban and restricted announcement. They just didn't put it anywhere. Is that green and blue will stop being the best color by such a far margin. They just didn't put that anywhere in there.
But then I realized that the blue-green story arc is over with this ban announcement, and so I believed them again. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
These commands are interesting. Like I'm reading them for the first time, and like they're all like powerful, but like I don't look at any of these and go, wow, that is like absurdly good. It feels actually a little bit more like some of the Kaldheim cards for me, where I'm like, these all look very playable, and like there's nothing embarrassing about playing these, but I'm also not looking at these and going, oh, this is a snap 4 of in every green blue deck. Well, maybe that one specifically is a bad example, but the black green one's not like an instant 4 of in any black green deck in any format of the last 4 years.
Yeah, see, that's sweet. Like cards that can have a niche that some decks might want 4 of, that are powerful enough to see play, but aren't so obviously powerful that, you know, that's just what you do off this beginning of the format. Like, if the rest of Strixhaven is like this, then it, together with Kaldheim, seem to be pretty good designs, I agree. And once Eldraine rotates, like, we might be back in a golden age of Magic.
I 100% support this golden age of Magic. I welcome our new lack of overlords in Standard.
Yeah, right? And it'll probably be great for however many sets in which, you know, a Praetor is showing up here and there. And then the Phyrexian set will wreck it again because they'll do some mana mechanic.
Let me tell you, I really like this green-black command, Witherbloom command. This card is my shit.
Yeah, this card is a lot of what I want to do in Magic, but it doesn't look like it's like a requirement and I have to have it. Do we want to read through these really quickly, or is that a little bit too much at the moment?
No, we can read through them, and then we'll probably wrap things up afterwards. But Witherbloom command costs a black-green, 2 mana sorcery. Reads choose 2. Target player mills 3 cards. Then you return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. Destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. Target creature gets -3, -1 until end of turn. Target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So, first off, converted mana cost is dead. New text for that is mana value. I like that. I don't know if you guys have any feelings about that.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with it. Like, immediately it kind of bothered me, but like the more like I think about it or I've seen it on cards, like I saw like somebody like quickly photoshopped it onto like a spell snare. It just reads very cleanly, so I support it for that reason.
Yeah, I like it. But this card is my shit, right? Like, it's almost mulch. It's 3 cards instead of 4. I can kill a 1 toughness creature. So you're telling me on my turn 2, I can kill a mono red 1-drop and mill 3 cards and pick up a land? That's nuts. Destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent. Trying to think of permanents that fit those types that I would love to kill in Standard right now. And I'm
this
drawing
hits Glass Casket.
Glass Casket, yeah, that's a good
It's
one.
Glass Casket. It hits Maze Mind Tome.
Yep, there you go.
You might want to hit an Omen of the Sea.
Sure.
There's some things around.
Or I can just shock my opponent to kill them if they're low.
Or you can just shock your opponent.
Like this card, like none of its effects are like overly insane, but I feel like this card is going to have a lot of really good use in whatever deck it fits into. And, you know, milling cards, picking up lands, that's something I enjoy doing. So I'm for this card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sweet. The blue-red one, some other people were talking about as well. Blue one is Prismari command. Costs 1 blue-red. And you can choose 2 from among. Deal 2 to any target. Target player draws 2 and discards 2. Target player makes a treasure and destroy an artifact. So
this
a
one's
bit of card selection,
as well.
A bit of damage, a bit of ramp. Just a reasonable mix of blue-red abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not as confident this one will see play as the other ones, but like this will probably show up as a 1 of or 2 of in like some modern decks. this probably shows up in standard as well. Like the looting ability is like powerful, but like this one's also an instant where like the black green one is a sorcery, and then the black white one is also a sorcery. But like the fact that all these are instant abilities is certainly a really big part of this. I mean, that's also blue red as an identity. So.
Yeah, I imagine blue red goldspan dragon decks would love to play this card.
Yeah, the treasure token goes further there. Even just having something that has modes that are useful that can also destroy an artifact if you need to. Like this is Embercleave protection. This is Great Henge protection.
Very relevant artifacts exist in standard right now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about Great Henge or Embercleave. Like again, I'm playing standard, but like you don't always see those cards. So no, that's a really big deal for some decks.
Yeah, like people have been playing cards like Ember Shieldbreaker or cards like Shredded Sails already in standard main decks for a while now. I feel like, a blue-red base deck would happily play this card over those. You're going to get a lot more value in a bunch of different scenarios than you would out of those other options.
I wonder if... So, like, Arclight Phoenix is gone. But if there's some other card in blue-red that interacts with the graveyard, that perhaps this looting effect could also be quite strong there.
Yeah.
Because it's not card advantage, but seeing 2 extra cards to shape your hand is quite strong.
I agree. The black-white one is interesting, but I wonder if it's a little too expensive for its abilities. It's a 4-mana sorcery, costs 2 black-white, choose 2. Target creature gets +3/+3 and gains flying until the end of turn. Return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Target player draws a card and loses 1 life. Target opponent sacrifices a creature. So... my immediate thought with this is I want to be returning Archfiend's Vessel with this. That seems like a good pairing. Obviously, some kind of deck like Black-White Clerics, that could be reasonable, but I don't know. 4 mana seems like a lot. And
the pump spell ability makes it seem a bit weak because those are usually not great in standard. But even if you just use the last 2, like if this was 4 mana, sack a creature, draw a card. Like a 4 mana destroy a creature, draw a card would probably see play.
Oh,
sack is a little bit less powerful, but with some other removal, you can line it up to hit what you want. So if it's just a removal spell that draws a card, that could be quite strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really know what home this slots into, like immediately off the top of my head. That's the only thing that concerns me because like that is very reasonable for 4 mana. But like if you're not a lower to the ground deck, like you're a little bit more mid range, or like if you're like an Esper control variant, like this is a card that's not going to slot into those archetypes as easily. Or if you do, you might only be playing 1 copy. So that's the only thing that jumps out to me about this. But if they're like if Clerics is like exists as a deck, this will probably see some play there.
Yeah, that's the thing. This card isn't green and it isn't blue. And those colors see play in most decks that exist in standard. And black-white is just a color pairing, hasn't been particularly good in a really long time. So I'm having a hard time imagining this one makes the cut, but it is still an interesting card.
The red-white one, I think, might kind of have a similar issue. Costs 5. It is an instant, but it costs 5. And like the red-white deck that we see in standard currently, the Showdown of the Scalds one, this is a bit above its curve. But for 5 mana at instant speed, you can choose 2 of make a 3/2 red-white spirit. It doesn't have flying, just a red-white spirit. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and indestructible and haste. It deals 3 damage to any target, and a target player gains 3 life. Or sacrifice a permanent and then draw 2 cards. What was that? Heroic Reinforcements was a 4 mana 2/1/1s, and your team got bigger and got haste.
Yeah,
it's a bit more expensive than that if you want to like make a 3/2 and then pump your team and give them haste. But it can lead to some similar play patterns where all of a sudden a bunch of damage comes out of nowhere. But for 5 mana, I'm not sure if this is good enough. Like for a Lightning Helix and something else, maybe 5 mana for a 3/2 the Lightning Helix is good. And also sacrifice a permanent to draw 2 cards. That is not really a red-white ability at all. So maybe just having that unique source of card advantage makes this something that some red-white decks want a couple copies of.
Yeah, 5 mana is a ton, but like if you sack a creature in response to your opponent's removal spell and then draw 2 cards, like that is very powerful. 5 mana is a lot of mana for that ability, but you get to tag another one of those lines onto that. So
yeah, it's just hard to imagine a red-white deck that's playing creatures that also just holds up 5 mana on its opponent's turn. But
yeah, this card will likely be very easy to play around.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but who knows?
Yeah, like I like your analog to heroic reinforcements. Obviously, this card seems pretty good in some kind of like red-white go wide deck, and maybe the other Lorehold cards in this set. I'm assuming Lorehold is the name of this color pairing house in the new set. By the way,
Yeah, these are the names of all the schools.
Yeah, so maybe there's the theme of this, or creating tokens going wide, that sort of thing, and maybe in context of all the other cards in this set, this could see a significant gain in power. But as it stands, yeah, I'm not really sure. Being 5 mana is just so much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the last one that we briefly talked about, mentioning it's not very good, is the green-blue one. It's 3 mana instant, costs 1 green-blue. Choose 2, return target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. Counter target artifact or enchantment spell. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from their graveyard into their library. So,
Yeah, I don't really know.
yeah.
Like outside of, so countering an artifact or enchantment, maybe you can hit those artifacts we were talking about earlier. Embercleave, Great Henge.
Yeah, there's good artifacts and enchantments. Showdown, yeah. Henge, Cleave,
But it's still like if you're just holding it up as a counter spell for those cards, I'm still like not super stoked to play many of these other modes. Maybe there's some sort of tempo aggro deck where you try and counter their big artifact while putting counters on your creature. But then if they just don't cast it, like if they just cast creatures or planeswalkers, you kind of have like bounce spells are rarely good enough in standard. Just putting counters on creatures, usually not good enough. The last mode feels, I guess you can shuffle in Croxes. Well, no, you can't even, because no, the target player, you pick all the targets. So you could make your opponent shuffle Croxes in. But yeah, I don't know. All these modes seem kind of underwhelming for 3 mana.
Yeah,
especially mana that's green and blue.
The restriction on the first ability, return target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand, like, would this card have been too powerful if it just said non-lands permanent?
Probably not.
It would have been fine.
Like, I'd like this card a lot more if I could bounce something and then counter that permanent with another copy of it when it comes back down. But, being able to counter an artifact that you bounced the turn before. But can't currently do that. Yeah, all the abilities kind of just seem weird to me.
Yeah, that's true. That's a weird split, that it can only counter things that can't bounce, and it can only bounce things that can't counter.
Yeah.
That's super strange. I do think putting like the 2/1/1 counters on a creature and like unsummon like in the right shell is kind of like a powerful ability for 3 mana at combat, but just like that shell doesn't really exist in standard or historic, and like this is certainly cost too high for any other format. Like I think about mono blue tempo and historic because sometimes that deck can be green blue tempo, and I just don't think this card fits into that archetype, unfortunately. So
yeah,
this card 100% going to ranch me in limited because it's an insane combat trick in limited, and it's at rare, so you're just not going to play around it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird. Like this one is by far the least, it's the most underwhelming out of all of them, but I think it still has a higher likelihood of seeing play than, say, the black-white one, just because it's green-blue. But
yeah, maybe.
you're not wrong on that. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to the 10-question Facebook quizzes. Which Strixhaven house are you?
Oh, yeah, great. Can't wait.
I think I'm a Prismari. What do you guys think?
I think you are also that.
See, I'm gonna disagree with that very slightly for you, Cam. I think you're a Quandrix, only because their motto is math is magic, and I feel like that sounds like you.
God, but it's the bad card.
That's
Why
a
do I have
shame.
to use the
Yeah,
bad- I also
actually, I didn't know that was their motto. Now, I think Cam, you have to reevaluate.
Hopefully it's one. Oh yeah, I mean, okay. And now I have an identity crisis because I'm supposed to be the blue-green school, but I want blue-green cards to be bad. This is very confusing.
What caused your midlife crisis? Magic
Also,
the Gathering schools.
Put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature, then I have to add, and I can't do that if I'm ever playing in paper. I'm gonna
Fair.
add it up wrong.
Yeah, but you might not get to do that for a long time, so you don't
That's
have to
true.
worry about
Arena
that.
will do it for me.
All right. Well, that wraps up the new Strixhaven spoilers, and I think that's going to wrap up our episode as we're gone a little bit over time. So thanks everybody for joining the club this week. Make sure, as always, you check out wizardtower.com for all your Magic single needs. Dylan, thanks for coming on the show again. It was great to have you.
Love being here. Anytime you guys want me, I will come and talk about Magic.
Awesome. And if you want to find more content from us, dwc.gg is the place to go. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you all next week.
See ya.